Welcome back to On Fire Television. It's the Diamond K Show. Thank you for joining me. A lot to get into today. A lot to get into. This has been a very extreme, very intense time. Here in the program, we deliver the biggest political and trending news stories of the day with original reporting from across this country, emanating from our studios in Baltimore and Atlanta. Show is fun, show is upbeat, but I also want to expose what is really happening in this country. On this program, I will give you the American story from my perspective. In addition to the top news stories of the day, we check social media for the latest topics. Of course, you can join me weekdays 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. for the Diamond K Show. Visit onfiretelevision.com. Obviously, today is not a weekday. But I did feel the need to come and talk about the verdict in the Kyle Rittenhouse case. So the jury found Rittenhouse, teenager, who shot 3 men during protests in Kenosha, Wisconsin last summer, found him not guilty. Not guilty of any of the charges against him. Jurors deliberated 3 days. And yesterday they delivered this verdict, accepting the defense that he was acting in self-defense. So many people not surprised by this. And you got people on opposite sides of this spectrum. The trial itself was a media circus. And I suppose that was inevitable. Obviously, there was intense criticism of the judge. His biased, just the bias that he showed was, unmistakable. I mean, there was no way that anyone could look at that circus of a trial and think that we were going to get anything other than what we got. Now, the predicament that the Rittenhouse trial was in, based on everything, I doubt that the trial could ever do what many Americans, many Democrats wanted. It could not produce a plain, clear, concise answer as to whether Rittenhouse was a hero or a villain. What it did, however, was say something about the state of race relations in this country. We are opposed on gun rights. We are opposed on protests. We are opposed on a number of things. And this trial did highlight some of those issues. These issues are political matters, not judicial matters. So when you go to a court for a judicial matter, but all you get is politics, you're going to have a lot of people that are unhappy because this country is supposed to be built on laws. The trial itself really hinged on the question of reasonable doubt. Reasonable doubt. Did Rittenhouse commit homicide or reckless homicide and recklessly endanger people? One of the controversial things that happened in this case, the judge during the trial dismissed 2 misdemeanor charges. One for breaking a curfew which he clearly did, and unlawfully possessing a dangerous weapon while younger than 18. The judge, cited errors by the prosecutors. Now, let's say that you are speeding. Let's say that you're under 18 or under 21. You're a teenager caught speeding, and let's say that the speed signs are, I don't know, 65, and then you go a few blocks down the road and it's 45, and then you go a few more blocks down the road and it's 65, and a few more blocks down the road and it's 25, right? In an instance like that, where someone is speeding and it's confusing as to what the speed is in a said area. Now, that might be something that maybe you could throw out. Maybe you could dismiss it. Maybe you could overlook it depending on a lot of factors, the age of the driver, depending on the amount of infractions they've had, depending on if they were drunk, like a lot of different things, right? And I don't think too many people would complain about that if it was something confusing and cut and dry like that. But to throw out one, the curfew violation, when clearly there was a curfew, but no one enforced it, right? The police didn't care. And seemingly the judge didn't care either. Then also throwing out the possession of a dangerous weapon while younger than 18. That level of leniency is very rarely given to black and brown people. Very rarely. Was this an example of white privilege at its worst? Yeah, definitely. Definitely. And as these things continue to unfold, we started to get the picture. If it was unclear, we started to get the picture as to where this trial was headed. From the beginning, the events that led to Rittenhouse fatally shooting 2 men and injuring another, I mean, they are incomprehensible without considering the role of race in this. And I've gone back and forth with folks online who said, the people that he shot were white. They were not black. This is not a race thing. I mean, can you get more ignorant than that? I suppose you can. Right? I suppose you can. But, someone who would deny the fact of race in this situation is either consciously turning their head to the obvious or just dumb or just a liar. I guess there's a lot of things. But these shootings occurred during a protest after a white police officer shot Jacob Blake, August of last year. We were already, as a country, in the midst of huge protests following the May murder of George Floyd. The country was at a boiling point. COVID-19 is running amok. There were a lot of things going on, a lot of tension, a lot of bad energy. And, the case could never serve as a plain assessment of race in this country. No one case can do that. Especially when the 3 men shot were all white. But why were they there? Why were these white guys at this protest? They were at this protest in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. Oh, that's the boogeyman for conservatives. Ooh, Black Lives Matter. Ooh. And, the most striking element of Rittenhouse's experience, and one of the reasons it became such a focal point for attention in this country, is the way that he was treated by the cops, right? The popo. Rittenhouse, teenager, right? He self-deployed, right? On his own, decides to go to the streets of Kenosha, not far from his home in Illinois, but in another state nonetheless. And he's carrying an AR styled rifle. This is the rifle of choice for many active shooters for several reasons, several obvious reasons. So moments before he shot the three men, moments before that, there is video footage showing the cops greeting Rittenhouse and giving him some water. Right? Giving him some water. These are the police. We have heard about many black and brown people shot with no weapon. Here we have a 17-year-old with an AR style rifle walking past the police, and they throw him some. Here, have some water. You look a little parched. So that is striking. That is outrageous. That was outrageous. But that showed you the direction that things were going. And wherever you live in the world, sometimes you can become disconnected from things. Sometimes you can feel like things are different than they are, maybe because of who you surround yourself with, maybe because of the company that you keep, maybe because of the places that you go. And then when you see what happens in other communities, it can snap you back, bring you back to reality, and highlight, illuminate how far we have to go. So after the shooting, Rittenhouse then went home, where his mother persuaded him to turn himself in. All right. Mother persuades him to turn himself in, turns himself in. At the police station, detectives cut off his interview when he plainly did not understand Miranda rights. Old enough to carry a gun around, but too immature and ignorant to understand Miranda rights. It's an interesting combination, wouldn't you say? Very interesting combination. Doesn't understand Miranda rights. Just tuning in, your man Diamond K in here, of course, the Diamond K Show. I am dissecting the Rittenhouse verdict trial. We're going to dive into that. And there's a lot to unpack here. Of course, the Diamond K Show is an On Fire television production. You can get the program on demand at the WRF Radio app, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Google Podcasts, and of course, YouTube.com/DJ Diamond K. Here on the Diamond K Show, we're very excited about the WRF Radio app. Take a moment to download WRF Radio in your app store. Leave me a comment. You can scroll your timeline, attend a Zoom meeting on mute, do some online shopping, all while listening to the Diamond K Show. We are talking about the Rittenhouse trial, media circus, and we're going to continue that right after this. So we are talking about the Rittenhouse trial. And many commentators have pointed out something that's very obvious. Something that's very obvious. A young teenage black man in the same situation that Rittenhouse was in, walking down the street with an AR styled rifle, would most certainly not have been afforded any of those indulgences that Kyle Rittenhouse's white privilege got him. A black 17-year-old walking down the street with an AR styled rifle. Do you think that the police would have given him a bottle of water? No. Do you think the police would have just waved to him and had him go about his merry way? No, not at all. But that is what happened with Kyle Rittenhouse. So when I talk to people online, in person, when I talk to people and they act like, what? Like, this is normal stuff. When they clutch their pearls, when I say that this is not the experience of black and brown people in this country. There is a double standard here. Some of them act confused. Now, the Second Amendment may be written in a race neutral way. Maybe. But in practice, black Americans and brown ones do not have the same rights as their white compatriots do. Their white counterparts have a different experience. And I'm not going to accept the fact that because they have a different experience, they are unaware. They are ignorant to the experience of others. You don't have to be a black person to understand this fact in America. And if you try to act like you're confused as to what I'm saying, you're lying. Yes, you're lying. It is very obvious. We've seen it time and time and time and time again. It doesn't even matter how old you are. That's how clear and obvious the differences are in this country. A young black teenager might never have had the audacity to go to protest with a rifle on his back. I mean, some of the most gangster guys in the hood would not have been dumb enough to go to a protest, walk past the police with an AR style rifle and walk right past. No, they just wouldn't have done it. But if he had, almost certainly he would not have been able just to walk past the police, shoot some people, kill some people, and then turn himself in on his own timeline, and then have his rights so delicately and carefully protected because the police said, "Oh, he doesn't understand his Miranda rights. We need to school this guy. Let's turn things off so we can, educate him." No, none of those things would have happened. None of those things would have happened. And you know this. But when folks sit online and I'd rather you just say what it is, but don't try to play this ignorant role. Don't try to play this card that many conservatives play, right? This injustice happened outside of the scope of the trial. This is before we even get to the trial, right? The way that this teenager was handled with kid gloves after he murdered 2 people. Oh, self-defense, right? After he murdered 2 people. The way he was treated before he murdered the 2 people. The enforcement of the law is a travesty in itself. Um, it is not. I mean, the way that the police treat teenage white boy, teenage black boy, right? That in itself, at its core, is the problem. That is the problem. So this case very polarizing. At pretty much as soon as it happened, the lines were drawn. You could see folks talking online on various sides of this situation. You could see that that MAGA crowd, that Trump crowd, chose to make Rittenhouse a hero. I'm talking about this before the trial. This was back last year. Chose to make him a hero. They were trying to raise money for him. They were trying to do a lot of different things because this case represented so much for the country. Represented and highlighted everything, or not everything, but many of the bad things about this country. It was disgraceful. Not merely because much of the effort has been shameless profiteering, bunch of conservative pirates making money on the backs of dead Americans that were shot down in the street. That part is disgusting. Rittenhouse, a child, but the choices that he made last summer are not something that anybody should try to imitate, black or white. The choices that Rittenhouse made last summer were disgraceful. He's a murderer. Now, where you sit on that statement is up to you, but he is a murderer. Now, even if you're more sympathetic, right? Even if you found yourself moved by Rittenhouse's breakdown, quote, air quotes, I got air quotes up, breakdown on the witness stand during the trial, because maybe you have a young kid, maybe you've seen, some teenagers that you were able to see Rittenhouse in, when he was on the witness stand, right? Even if you are sympathetic to that, you should, as a human being, object to the celebration of the worst moment in a teenager's life. In this teenager's life, the worst moment, the killing of two people and the injuring of one. We don't need heroes like this. We don't need heroes like this. And the people that have, uplifted these actions, this is not what this country needs. We already have a force that is granted the right to carry and use firearms in the defense of peace in the country. They're called police officers, right? They are trained, they are regimented, they are regulated, there is a command structure. But when we consistently have citizens untrained, one that doesn't even understand Miranda rights, right? When we have people just grabbing guns because they can legally own them or carry them, and then going to protest and trying to enforce the law that they don't even understand. This kid didn't even know what a Miranda right was, if you want to believe what was happening. But he's going to be enforcing some law? Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? And then some Americans are defending that. Are you serious? We have police officers that are all legally adults. This Rittenhouse, he ain't even an adult now. He's the hero. He needs to go to school. He needs to study. There's a whole conglomeration of things that he could be doing. Police officer, he is not. Now, that even goes past the question of whether a 17-year-old should even possess a rifle. So initially, Rittenhouse had a charge of unlawfully possessing a dangerous weapon. Remember that? But the judge threw that out in a dispute over the length of the gun. Talking about bending over backwards. Talking about bending over backwards. For what? They bent over backwards for this kid. Right? The police did it. The judge did it. And it continued. The MAGA crowd did it. I do not agree with vigilantes. The larger, more socially important matter of whether or not 17-year-olds, I mean, let alone anybody else, should be acting as a vigilante defense force. This is a political issue. No judge can necessarily resolve that. This is a political issue. Some laws have to be in the books. But we have police officers. We do not need untrained civilians taking the law into their own hands and shooting people down in the street. Once this teenager was out in the streets of Kenosha carrying this rifle, he gets into a confrontation with some men. So obviously he shot one. Now this becomes a legal question. Now this becomes something that we can look at the law for. Obviously, what comes up in this situation, self-defense. Now, you have to look at this from multiple perspectives. You look at this from the perspective of Rittenhouse, who's looking for trouble. He went to a protest, and he's on the opposite side of the protest. Then you have the protesters seeing someone with a gun, a rifle, who ain't down with their team and's already shot somebody. From their perspective, that looks like something as well. So, self-defense laws are being stretched to their limits. Self-defense laws being stretched to their limits. And it is something that is very frustrating to watch. Going to a protest armed, to me, is a stupid thing to do. It's definitely provocative. It's dangerous. But it is not necessarily illegal. Depending on where you are, depending on what the gun laws are in the area of the protests, it may not be illegal. Could be dangerous, could be foolish, could be stupid, not wise. So, where and when does self-defense start to take effect? Self-defense does not take prior wisdom into account. That's the tricky part about the law. But it begins at the moment of conflict. That's where things can get tricky. Now, a reasonable jury might have reached a different conclusion on these charges. Maybe. But that is one of the things that we were dealing with in this trial. Now, when you look at, I don't know, say the Derek Chauvin case, where he was convicted of murdering George Floyd, the prosecution in Minneapolis was very effective using the witnesses and knocking down the defense's arguments. There was, you know, video footage of the entire episode, different than in this case. Now, when you have these high profile, strong cultural war elements, prosecution, the pressure is on. The pressure is on. Remember the George Zimmerman trial? That was, when you have those type of cases, when the country is watching, it really shines a light and magnifies the mistakes that the prosecutors make. In Rittenhouse's case, people from the left and the right took issues with the prosecution's decisions. And, a lot of times you don't necessarily want to side with the prosecutors. A lot of times you don't want to side with the defense. You just kind of want to let things play out. The justice system is supposed to be blind. You see the lady, she has the blindfold on. The justice system is supposed to be blind. But clearly, in these cases, the lady justice is flipping up that blindfold and looking to see if the folks are black or white or what. And then they are moving accordingly. The Chauvin case with George Floyd, it was an exceptional case, mainly because it was a straightforward case. Wasn't a whole lot to it. The facts were relatively clear. It was laid out. It was on video. One reason that Chauvin was convicted, while so many other police officers charged in killings have not been, but the other thing, the symbolism of Floyd's murder, the stakes of the case have been closely matched. If you compare that to the Rittenhouse trial, the expectations were, I don't know, symbolic. I think there were a lot of actual issues with this case. It is unrealistic for us to expect the justice system to sort out messy questions. It's not something that happens. These political questions, us going to the courts to try to get them, sorted out, doesn't happen. Americans cannot rely on the justice system to do what the political system can't do. Right? We're going to have to figure this out. We're going to have to, as a country, come to some of these answers and conclusions. So I don't know. I don't know. And I'm not done with this. We're gonna do. We're gonna take a quick break, and we're gonna come back with more of the show. Uh, Diamond K in here, and I am dissecting this Kyle Rittenhouse case, the verdict, and we're gonna get into more of that after this. And we are back. Your man Diamond K in here, of course, on Fire Television, and we are talking about this controversial Kyle Rittenhouse case. Go to the comment section here. Darrell Ferguson says, "Where you been, bro? Glad to see my hometown internet channel, Radio on Fire, DJ Diamond K, doing what they do. Much love already." Baltimore, Maryland. Shout out to you, Darrell Ferguson. I've been here. I've been around. I ain't hard to find. Of course, on social media, I am at the Diamond K Show. So we're talking about this case, and it is one thing to have this trial, and then we have several other trials, several other high-profile trials going on, and we're going to be getting verdicts to those as well, and pretty soon. So this is just going to be an ongoing thing where we are reacting to these cases, reacting to these trials. Let's do this. Let's go to advertiser one. All right. So the Diamond K Show, of course, sponsored by Flyers on Fire. If you need a flyer created, Flyers on Fire can design your quality digital flyer in 24 hours. Are you promoting something on social media? Holidays are coming up. Flyers on Fire can help brand your message with a quality flyer. Visit them on Instagram at Flyers on Fire. So we are talking about the Kyle Rittenhouse case, the verdict, that whole thing that went down. And many people not surprised at all. And what did this case come down to? What were we looking at in this case? Two narratives. And these narratives are opposed, right? To the prosecutors, Rittenhouse was a vigilante with an AR-15 style weapon who went looking for trouble. To the defense, Rittenhouse was a sobbing teenager who testified that he found himself under attack in those lightning fast moments and made the reasonable decision to protect himself. These were the two opposed narratives. Depends on how you look at it. Depends on where you sit when you look at the facts, right? Now, based on the verdict, the jury clearly believed that Rittenhouse was the crying teenager who testified that he was under attack and he just had to protect himself. That's what the jury believed. And given the facts, the law, and the circumstances of the trial, this is no surprise. Now, it was always going to be an uphill battle for the prosecutors. It was always going to be that. The key issue was, did Rittenhouse act in self-defense? That's the key issue. That's what it all hinges on. Now, what does that mean? That means that he reasonably feared for his life when he pulled the trigger. That's what it comes down to. Now, when you weigh Rittenhouse's self-defense claim, when you weigh that against the two dueling narratives, it's not something easy to do. But that is what the jury was tasked with. That's what they had to do. So somebody could say that, and I guess you could say this reasonably, Rittenhouse was provoked. Rittenhouse provoked the attacks on him, openly carrying the weapon in a threatening manner, and that he had the option to run away, or he had the option to avoid using deadly force. He could have done that. He could have done that, even if defending himself. If the jury had found either of these things to be true, that would have defeated the self-defense claim. That would have. That's not what they found, though. But there was also evidence, including this very critical video that had, the events in question shown. The testimony of Rittenhouse, because he took the stand. Taking the stand, usually a defense attorney in this situation would advise against that. Rittenhouse taking the stand helped him. It did. It helped him. So this video, in the key moments right before he pulled the trigger, Rittenhouse acted in response to the threats to his personal safety, and he believed he was in danger. So our criminal system generally favors the defendant, surprisingly, but it does. Now, at the core, the belief is that it is better to see a guilty man go free than to convict an innocent one. But far too often, that is what happens. In criminal cases, prosecutors have the highest burden of proof. In this legal system, that's the highest. And that is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. What is reasonable? Now, it should be no surprise to you that Wisconsin law is sympathetic to homicide defendants claiming self-defense. You saw this on full display. Once a defendant raises the self-defense, once they raise that as an issue, it requires prosecutors to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant did not act in self-defense. So we got a lot of problems here. We have a lot of problems here. The judge who presided over the case influenced the jury. His frequent tongue lashes did not make it easy for the prosecutors. He was feisty. He was belligerent. The judge I'm talking about. He was clearly favoring Rittenhouse. The judge openly and arrogantly displayed pro-Rittenhouse bias. If you remember, the judge ruled that the prosecutors would not be allowed to refer to Rittenhouse victims as victims. The people that were dead could not be called victims. And encouraged a round of applause for the defense witnesses on the stand because he was a veteran. Right? There were so many things. So many things. Whether the defendant acted reasonably in a stressful moment. That is the main question for the jury. And that is exactly why we have a 12-jury system where members of the community come together to judge their fellow man. Without question, There's no denying the fact that Rittenhouse did not have to be in Kenosha with his weapon strapped across his body as he ran around the streets in what was clearly an unpredictable, dangerous situation. He did not have to be there. He chose to do that. Had he exercised better judgment and stayed home that night, those two guys would still be alive. But in Wisconsin, that initial decision, as poor of a decision as it was, in itself was not a crime. Yeah, in itself was not a crime. So many people are going to be worried. What happens next? What's going to be the result of this? This could backfire. Things like this happening, vigilante justice, this could provoke, encourage, force protesters to start being armed. So then you got vigilantes, quote unquote, vigilantes, self-deputized vigilantes and protesters, and they're armed because they could be armed as well. And then you have major conflict in the streets of the country. Major conflicts. Why? Because certain types of behaviors have been pacified, allowed. Interesting. I want to go to a few comments here. So this person says that Rittenhouse is going to sue everyone. Going to sue people for what? So Rittenhouse, I mean, he was acquitted of all charges. What is he going to sue people for? Please enlighten me. Okay. Well, yes, if he did and the prosecutor won, it could be grounds for mistrial. Okay. And you say he'd be what? He'd be suing everybody. Is that supposed to be everybody? So what I want to know what these are, I'm assuming, supporters of Rittenhouse. What is he going to be suing people for? What was done to Rittenhouse where he has a case for that? I'd like to know that. So was this episode unique? I think a lot of this depended on the fact that it was in Wisconsin, where the laws are structured in a certain way. Definitely, I think that public concern about Rittenhouse's conduct, and obviously the results, may lead to a re-examination of Wisconsin's gun laws. That could happen. If a re-examination of Wisconsin's gun laws comes out of this, that could be a positive thing. That could be. We don't need things like this to continuously happen. The MAGA crowd should be allowed to protest things. Folks on the left should be allowed to protest things. And people with opposing views should not be showing up with guns and then killing the other one, whether I disagree or agree with whoever. That does not need to happen. And I don't know if the folks on the right understand that that is a possibility. If you continue to beat these people down, if you continue this vigilante style action, eventually the folks on the other side are going to take the cue and do the same thing. No? I mean, that's common sense. That's common sense. But as folks say often, common sense ain't always common. Common sense ain't always common. I'm just saying we are going down a very dangerous road. We need to dial this back some. We need to dial this back some. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section. Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, TikTok, at The Diamond K Show. Of course, I am here, and I enjoy talking about these types of situations. I do. And I also enjoy talking about it with people that disagree with me, because the only way we are going to come to some rational conclusions is by having conversations. And everybody you have a conversation with is not going to agree with you. You should be able to listen to me. I should be able to listen to you. We hit this ball back and forth, and we can, get to some solutions. So that is what I like to do here. Of course, many folks hit me up with opposing and supporting narratives, supporting opinions on social media, of course, on Twitter at The Diamond K Show. On Fire Television is an advertiser-supported audio and video network. Get breaking news, podcasts, and TV shows covering topics that are important to our culture. OnFireTelevision.com is where you go to discover, engage, and connect with the latest news. To support the Diamond K Show and this digital network, head on over, as I said, OnFireTelevision.com. Grab a t-shirt, some other merch. You can become a sponsor of the Diamond K Show for as low as $50. I'm able to deliver our news and our views on this program because of our listeners and our sponsors. We are powered by the people, and we appreciate your support. So I'm going to be back here tomorrow with more of this. And let's do this. Take a quick break before So now that the trial is over, now that we are on the other side of that verdict, what is the easiest way to move forward? Does Kyle Rittenhouse just disappear into the infamy of, Illinois, wherever he lives at? Does he become someone that comes out and starts doing interviews and talking crazy? Is that what he's going to do? Or is he going to just fade into the background and try to, just become a member of society? I personally think that the MAGA crowd is going to adopt him as their own, and we're going to see this guy out here talking and doing interviews and talking greasy. That's what I'm predicting. Hopefully I'm wrong, but I think that is what's going to happen. He is young, he's impressionable, and you have a lot of folks with bad intentions, without question. I think that is what's going to happen. So we'll be back here tomorrow. And of course, we're going to be watching the trials in Georgia as well as the trials in Virginia. On Monday, I'm going to talk about the case in Texas where the accused serial killer, a black guy too, in Texas. We're going to talk about that on Monday. A lot of things to get into, of course, the Diamond K Show. Thanks for listening. I'll see you guys tomorrow.